What we have here is the Volkswagen Atlas. It's gotten some important updates for 2022, and we'll cover that. But we haven't had an Atlas on the channel in a really long time. So let's take a second to cover what this thing is. This Atlas is VW's flagship SUV, which means it's their biggest and their most expensive vehicle that they sell. Now, it's a unibody design, so that means it's intended to shine on the road and have good manners, not necessarily a trail vehicle. And that's a good thing because it's underpinned by VW's MQB chassis architecture, which is very good. But like I said, this is their flagship SUV. It's their biggest one, and it has 3 rows. And as such, it finds itself with some pretty stiff competition. Its closest rivals are things like the Palisade/Telluride twins, the Honda Pilot, Toyota Highlander, Nissan Pathfinder, Subaru Ascent, Ford Explorer, and Chevy Traverse, and of course the Dodge Durango. And with such stiff competition, VW has to find a way to stand out. And they have. To my knowledge, this Atlas is technically the slowest 0 to 60 among most, if not all, of the competitors that I just mentioned. So whether or not it's the reason to stand out, they technically have that crown. In fairness to the Atlas, it doesn't parade around making phony claims of being this sports SUV. This Atlas knows what the people want and are actually looking for in this segment, and that's space, and it's got that in spades. And we'll talk about that more when we talk about the interior. What we have to do now is assess what this thing is like to drive. So, under the hood, 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder. Sounds pretty familiar for Volkswagen. It makes 235 horsepower and 258 pound-feet of torque. It's not super impressive power figures. However, this is the EA888 motor from Volkswagen, which we're familiar in seeing in more performance-oriented cars like the GTI, and even in more luxury-oriented cars like some Audis. Now, the thing that we know about this EA888 engine is that if you really, really want to, you can tune it to make it quite a bit more power. But to be honest, it feels perfectly strong enough for day-to-day driving. One place it would be nice to have more power is in terms of towing. On the 3.6-liter V6 Atlases, you get 5,000 pounds of max towing, which is pretty good, and about what I'd expect. However, this 2-liter turbo 4-cylinder maxes out at just 2,000 pounds. Yeah, so if you're going to tow, you're going to want to go with the V6. This 4-cylinder is here mainly to get you better fuel economy. And it does. You get 22 mpg combined for all-wheel drive, or 23 mpg combined for front-wheel drive. Which is like the same as an all-wheel drive V6 3.8-liter naturally aspirated Palisade. But another thing that does help fuel economy is an 8-speed Tiptronic transmission. It's not the DSG, so the shifts aren't quite as sharp. You don't have paddle shifters here, but again, this isn't a sports SUV. And to be honest, it's fine because the Tiptronic is a simpler transmission, which means there's less to go wrong, should be more reliable, and then run cheaper. From there, we mentioned a minute ago that this can be had with front-wheel drive or all-wheel drive. And that's true. Front-wheel drive is base, of course, but you can option VW's 4Motion all-wheel drive. 4Motion is pretty similar to most all-wheel drive systems and front-wheel drive-based cars. It sends power to the front, but the computer is constantly keeping track of wheel speed and will divert power to the back as it deems necessary. It can send up to half of the power to the back if needed. And speaking of the all-wheel drive system, now is probably a good time to talk about drive modes. You essentially have 4 types of modes. You have a snow mode, an on-road mode, an off-road mode, and an off-road custom mode. And within those modes, you have sub-modes, I guess you could say. In your on-road mode, you have Eco, you have Normal, Sport, and Custom. And then, interestingly enough, since we're talking about all-wheel drive, the off-road mode has an auto setting, or you have that individual mode, which essentially gives you the opportunity to adjust certain things like descent, hill descent control, and that sort of thing. But this Atlas does use a clever trick that you see in some of the most legendary off-roaders in history, like the Toyota 4Runner. In the 4Runner, it's called Multi-Terrain Select, but it essentially uses the car's wheel speed sensors to detect slip or if a wheel is free spinning. Then it will use the brakes on that wheel so the car will divert power to the other wheel that has traction. The big difference here is that the 4Runner will do this all day, whereas the Atlas system won't. Aside from that though, this is basically what you see across the rest of the segment. You get hill descent, you get a center locking differential for your all-wheel drive system, and that's job done, that's good enough. And just like the performance thing that we've talked about, this is not pretending to be a Jeep. This is not pretending to scale rocks over in Moab. What it is something that's designed to eat up highway miles and to commute in. And that means it's good on the road, which is exactly where this thing shines. The chassis is strong and refined for safety, and sure, it doesn't have crazy power, but you've got a strut front suspension and a multi-link rear setup. What that means then in simple terms is this thing just floats along incredibly comfortably. Since it's not burdened by the fake expectation of being sporty, it can get on with what I and probably most of its customers want from it, and that's to just get me from A to B as comfortably as possible. We just went over some train tracks, and I was not completely shaken to death by the suspension. It held up just fine in a corner earlier, and it's nice and smooth. The suspension soaks up mild to moderate road imperfections super well. It's reasonably quiet and refined here in the cabin. The steering is a bit lighter than I would probably want, but it's definitely on par for something in this segment, and to be honest, it's just easy to drive. It's easy to live with. The visibility is phenomenal. You have so much space in here, so much light comes in with this massive panel roof that I just feel relaxed driving this thing, and more so than probably 90% of the cars that we've tested over the last year here on Downshift. So it's incredibly easy to get on with from a driving perspective. So that's probably a good time to talk about what's going on outside. Okay, so yeah, behind the wheel, this thing isn't exactly a sports car, and it's not exactly a Jeep, but that's the point here. What this thing does super well is it provides you a comfortable place to soak up mile after mile after mile. And when we talk about the exterior of this thing, I think it looks pretty good. I think it's one of the stronger components of the Atlas. Now, up front here, this is the SE trim, so it's not quite as fancy or aggressive or in your face as something like an R-Line, but I think it still looks handsome. You've got these bulges in the hood giving it kind of a more aggressive and masculine look to it. It's a very geometric front fascia, and the grille and headlights themselves are actually borrowed from the Atlas Cross Sport, and that happened last year. You do have full LED headlights as standard, and then the lower valence is, again, even for the SE trim, which is the entry-level trim, it's handsome. I think it looks good. Around the side here, the base wheel is an 18-inch. What we have here are 20-inch wheels. You can get them black painted, you can get 21-inch wheels depending on your trim. And then, one of my favorite things about the design of the Atlas is the not stereotypical is not the right word, but you have these really noticeable hard body lines that are humped over the wheel arches, and I think it's just kind of cool. It's a nice distinctive styling element without being completely overdone, like something like, I don't know, a Nissan or a Hyundai. Around the back, of course, you do have LED taillights. They're the IQ light. You have a chrome bar that says Atlas. You've got the new VW logo. And then, of course, you've got the Imposter exhaust. But to be honest, I guess I'll take this over just, a truck-style tailpipe hanging out the bottom. But with that, let's step inside, talk about the best thing about this car. Okay, on the interior here is, I think, where the Atlas makes its most compelling argument yet. Sure, the materials aren't exactly Audi, but you're not paying Audi money, so they shouldn't be. What you are getting for your money, though, is a cavernous interior. The trunk is the biggest of really any of the competitors that I've tested. The third row is pretty spacious. I can fit back there at 6'1", and now I have USB-Cs back there, so thanks 2022. The second row, if you got captain's chairs, which we have here, wildly spacious. I haven't tested the bench seat, so we only have 6 seats in this configuration, which is a little bit odd. It's, again, really only one more seat than you would get in just a regular 2-row, maybe like a Tiguan or something like that. But either way, it feels super, super spacious in here. The second row seats, they slide forward and back, they recline, and they do that thing where they fold, but they don't hinge at the back, so you can have a car seat there. You don't have to fuss around with moving it every time you want to get someone in and out of the back seat. So again, it's a really good thought process in how this vehicle is going to be used and what's going to make the most sense for the space. And in tandem with that, you have an enormous panoramic sunroof that I absolutely love. The seats themselves, like what we're talking about with this whole usability thing, they're a leatherette in this SE and they're super easy to clean. Everything is super usable. But now moving up and talking about the front seats and some of the tech features that you get here. New for 2022, standard is the digital cockpit, which is fantastic. You can either get an 8-inch screen or the upgraded digital cockpit Pro, which will upgrade you to a 10.25-inch screen. Another thing that I think is interesting is standard. You have digital cockpit, LED headlights and taillights, and then the other thing that you have as standard is rain sensing wipers, which I'm now figuring out is a trigger for me after we spent that time in the Jeep Grand Wagoneer, which was, of course, over $110,000 and didn't seem to have rain sensing wipers. Anyway, I digress. IQ Drive is their self-autonomous driving system. It works pretty well. It's not exactly class leading, but I think it works just fine for, you know, the everyday person. Your center infotainment screen is either, well, ready, 6.5 inches, or you can upgrade to an 8-inch screen. It's a little on the smaller side. Some competitors are bringing a 10.25 or even a 12-inch screen, so it's a little bit smaller, but there is an interior refresh coming to the Atlas, I believe, next year. You don't have a 360 camera on this SE trim, but you can get it in higher trims, and the resolution is actually pretty good. We've spent a lot of time in Toyotas recently with backup cameras that they look like they're webcams from like the late 90s. Your speaker system, we have the bass system in here, which actually doesn't sound too bad. It's a 6-speaker system. You can upgrade to the Fender audio system, which will double your speakers, and I don't think I've actually tested that one, but I'm not offended by the sound that comes out of this thing, even with the bass speakers. Your center stack is usable. There's a lot of fingerprints that end up on your screen, but you're going to get that with most touch screens. It's the classic VW fashion with the volume knob that spins and drives me insane, but whatever. You do have heated seats, and then you have really usable climate controls. Again, everything in here is meant to be easy to use, simple, and make sense, and it is. You've got a storage bin under there with additional USB-Cs and a 12-volt. You've got piano black surrounding your shift lever and your drive modes, and dual cup holders that you could fit an extender in, because the Downshift water bottle of truth fits, actually. Surprise! So that's pretty impressive. This and the 4Runner, and surprisingly the GR86, are the only vehicles that we've tested in the last like 2 years that actually fit this water bottle. So that's really cool. But now I think that's probably a good time to talk about the final thoughts. So there it is, the Volkswagen Atlas for 2022. It's brought some important updates, and for an as-tested price of just under 44 grand, it strikes an incredible value of giving you the biggest, most usable, and most human-friendly cabin and cargo area in the segment. Having debuted in 2017, it's gotten a facelift or two. It's still ultimately in its first generation. Sure, it's showing its age a little, and a new generation will fix some of those issues. But still, it's a really nice, family-friendly option. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.